Um, so, David Stork is an adjunct professor at the University of Stanford in Northern California, and he's a world pioneer of the brand new field of using computer technology to do new forms of analysis of painting. He's published several books, some on this subject, some on others, because during his long academic career, he's covered a very wide range of disciplines, because his PhD at the University of Maryland was in physics. He's an alumni of MIT, and he tells me that he's taught and researched and done work in a wide range of subjects which take you from physics all the way to art history and back again. So it's an unusual combination, and I'm looking forward very much to hear David telling us all about what happens when computers look at art. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Simon, and thank you to the staff of the British Institute, and especially thank you all for coming. I've given more than 1,000 public talks like this, but I think this is the first one in which there are not one, but two dogs. So I work in the fields of computer vision, machine learning, pattern recognition, and artificial intelligence. And these are disciplines that are trying to make computers see or interpret images. And this field has revolutionized every discipline that deals with images. From medical image analysis, computers are more accurate at finding and diagnosing cancers from tumors, remote sensing, analyzing the images from satellites, or the cameras on the front of self-driving cars, to facial recognition, to undersea exploration, recognizing fish and so forth, posture, recognizing or diagnosing and inspecting fruit and so forth. One field I worked on, computer lip reading, making a computer analyze the face to understand what someone is speaking, analyzing architecture and so forth. It's revolutionized every field that deals with images except one, art history. And this is rather perplexing and yet an opportunity, because the images we find in our museums are some of the most fascinating, diverse, interesting images and valuable images ever made. And they pose problems to some of the smartest scholars who haven't solved them for decades and sometimes hundreds of years. So about 25 years ago, I started this field, and I'm happy to say that it's a small but growing number of us worldwide trained in computer science and art history are using computer techniques to analyze paintings in new ways. And that's what my talk will be about today. That's what came out of all of this is sort of the foundation of my brand new book, came out a few months ago, Pixels and Paintings, Foundations of Computer-Assisted Connoisseurship. As foundation, you should recognize that computing is a tool. It's to aid art scholars, not replace them. It's an enhancement. Computing is much like a microscope for a biologist or a telescope for an astronomer. It's a tool to be used. It doesn't take away your art knowledge. It enhances it and lets you do analyses that you couldn't do otherwise. Many art scholars are worried they're going to have to learn how to program computers. No, you don't have to. You have to learn how to use some of these techniques, what they're strong at, how to use them, but you don't have to learn how to program them any more than a biologist has to learn how to make a microscope. And these art scholars should understand these component technologies. The one in particular is called deep neural networks, I'll mention today. And it's a dialogue between art scholars and computer scientists to help guide the development of techniques that provide genuine scholarly value to the art community. And I've been inspired, motivated by Giovanni Morelli. Many of you may know he was a medical doctor and a rather poor playwright, but he spent much of his life diagnosing his patients, and he observed very carefully their fingernails, their ears, the color of their skin, their posture, and so forth. And late in life, he brought this new sort of scientific observation, scientific connoisseurship to problems in the history of art. And he incidentally was offered the directorship of the Uffizi Gallery, but he turned it down. And he overturned more than 100 attributions. This is a remarkable achievement. And so I consider him sort of the godfather of a sort of scientific approach that enhances art scholarship. But now we have a new tool that he certainly would have used had he had computers in his day. So let me start. Oh, so he noticed, for instance, that certain artists rendered their fingers and fingernails and ears and so forth in different ways. And forgers and copyists didn't care much about these little details, but he did. And that helped him overturn, as I say, over 100 attributions. So let me give one example of something that art scholars do now, but how it can be enhanced using computing. Analyzing the pose in portraits is, of course, an important aspect of understanding what the artist is trying to get across. But I'll say traditional art scholars will say, oh, this is portrait view or frontal view or 3/4 and so forth. And when they do a study, they might do 3 or 4 or 5 paintings at a time. But imagine you wanted to look at the development of portrait pose over 500 years and look at, well, let's say 11,000 paintings to do that. You wouldn't do it by eye. It would take years, but you can do it by computers. So we're going to represent the pose in a portrait using 3 rotation angles: yaw, roll, and pitch. If any of you who are pilots like me know these rotation angles. And the so-called production model, as we say in computer science, is that we imagine that there's a subject and that there's the artist's eye and that there's a projection onto a picture plane. It has nothing to do with use of optics or anything like this. It's just what the artist sees. And it's the locations of key points, the corners of the mouth, the tip of the nose, the position of the chin, and so forth, that are dependent on the pose. And a computer can learn to take those positions, that configuration of key points, we call them, or feature points, and compute can infer what angles, all 3 angles, a particular head has. And so here's some results. You have Modigliani there at the right. And the computer tells you to 0.1 degrees the rotation angles, in fact, all 3 of them. And now you can apply this to thousands of paintings. So my student, as a part of a class project, looked at 11,000 paintings, digital paintings online, and did this, estimated these rotation angles for all 11,000. It took only 20 minutes. And now here is just one of many graphs he produced. This is the roll angle, how much you're tipping your head like this. And I hope you can read it. These are different art movements like the early Renaissance, neoclassicism, Impressionism, and so forth. And these bars show the distribution, what rotation angles you find in, Japanese ukiyo-e prints and primitivism. And those are the ones I'm going to look at. If you look at ukiyo-e, like Hokusai and so forth, the Japanese woodblock master, you find that there's a great range of angles. Whereas for primitivism, it's very small. They don't rotate very much at all. And so here's what it looks like. These are so-called mie poses, often from kabuki dances. If you've ever been to kabuki, I've gone many, many times. In the play, there'll be a moment, a dramatic moment, where the actor will then take a pose and tip a head and so forth. And the woodblock prints record those dramatic moments. Whereas in primitive art, either the artist is rather untrained, or someone like Matisse, who's extraordinary draftsman, is deliberately trying to be, I'll put simple in great big quotes, but they're not rotation. And so this kind of analysis is done by the computer very, very quickly and very easily. Another aspect that we didn't expect, we weren't planning on this, was we applied this to a part of our data, part of our images were self-portraits. And there's a difference between a right-handed self-portrait and a left-handed self-portrait. They rotate their heads in the final painting, their heads are rotated different directions. And we could therefore find in 11,000 paintings in about 1.2 seconds, which artists were left-handed. So that's the kind of tool, you could do this by hand, but you wouldn't want to. Now I want to show you a technique from computer vision that is actually provably superior to even some of the best connoisseurs alive. And that is the analysis of lighting in a tableau. So this is Vermeer's Girl with a Pearl Earring. You're all familiar with this. And Vermeer was, of course, a master in rendering the effects of light. But if we ask the simplest technical question about the light in this painting, it would be this: what's the direction of illumination? And if two art scholars disagreed, how would we adjudicate? These are different interpretations. Oh yeah, I think it's here and you think it's here. Those are equally valid. No, computer methods can resolve any such disputes, if you will, and estimate the direction incredibly accurately, as I'll show you. I'll show you 6 techniques that we used on this painting. They fall into 2 categories. First are called model independent. These are methods that don't make us assume or require us to know the 3-dimensional form of her face in this case. We'll look at a cast shadow cast by the tip of her nose, and then a very interesting technique called the occluding contour algorithm. And then the model dependent methods, where we do need to know or make some assumptions about 3-dimensional forms in the tableau. So we'll make a 3D model of the pearl, of her eye, of the face, and then the entire tableau. So the simplest method is cast shadow analysis. You take a point on an occluder, like the tip of her nose, and its corresponding cast shadow point over there, draw a straight line with error bars, and you find the direction to the light, the illumination is 150 plus or minus 2 degrees, where throughout I'm going to measure angles with respect to the horizontal, like that. Now, the occluding contour algorithm or occluding contour theory, it comes from a branch of computer vision called shape from shading. Now, I won't go through all the mathematics, but if you're welcome, but if there won't be a test, except for my students. If we had a 3-dimensional model of her face, well, then the computer can say what direction of illumination on that model would give us the pattern of lightness that we find in the painting. But let's assume we don't have a model of her face. Well, 2 computer vision experts, Elias and Eklund in Sweden, came up with a very clever idea. They said, don't worry about the shape of the face throughout the face, only worry around the occluding contour or the outer boundary here, because there we know the direction of the surface. Think of an arrow, we call it a normal vector. That normal vector, that arrow, we know for sure is pointing in that direction at that point on the face. It's not pointing up, not pointing down. Also, it's not pointing towards us or away from us. So we know for sure what the orientation of that spot on the face is. And I won't go through the math. It makes it much simpler. And there's the math. And here's another way to look at it. That here we have a 3-dimensional object, and we measured the brightness at a given point. I'll just point with this. And if we just measure one spot here, and it happens to be gray, that's determined by how bright the light is, the angle the light's striking, and the albedo. Is this surface gray or white or black? And if I just give you one such point, you can't tell where the direction of light is. But if I measure it along a whole contour, along the occluding contour, then you can. Look at this point. This is bright. It's probably tipped toward the light. This one is dark, probably tipped away from the light. And the mathematics I just whipped through takes all these measurements and says, what direction best explains the pattern of lightness that we find along the outer boundary? And so I was the first to ever apply this to paintings. And I thought, I'm a good scholar. I wanted to see if anyone had done this before me. And turns out someone had. Leonardo. He was interested in how bright he should paint the occluding contour. And he understood fully that, the light striking perpendicularly here at this part of the forehead, paint that bright. At this part, it's glancing, paint that dark. And so he was using it to paint things, I'll say correctly. We work backwards, we measure it, and then say the direction to the illumination. And by the way, this was developed not for paintings, but for forensic photography. There was a time when one photo of Brad and Angelina sold for $500,000 US, $500,000. And my colleague and friend used the occluding contour algorithm on Brad and found out the light was coming from this direction. And on Angelina, it was coming from this direction. This was photoshopped, or as we say, tampered. It's completely fake. And you're not very good at recognizing that. That's why so many fakes get by us. But the computer methods are extraordinarily sensitive and easily find this kind of thing. So here are our results for the girl with the pearl earring. Turned out to be 149 plus or minus 4 degrees. Now for the model dependent methods. I took a high resolution photograph of the pearl painting in the Mauritshuis Museum in The Hague. And we can confidently assume that the pearl is cylindrically symmetric. And so I could build a 3D computer graphics model of the pearl, and then you so-called texture map, add the white surface to it. And then in the computer, I can put the light source wherever I want until the rendered pearl matches that in the painting as closely as possible. And that's my estimate to the direction of illumination. And that we have here, and turns out to be 155 plus or minus 4 degrees. What about highlights on the eye? If you have a light source and an eye, and then here is Vermeer's eyeball looking at it, the light lies in a plane that's tipped depending upon where the light source is. So what that means is if you put a dot in the middle of the eyeball of her eye and then draw a line through the highlight itself and continue, that tells you the angle to the direction of illumination. And for girl with the pearl earring, turns out to be 150 plus or minus 2 degrees. Now the most sophisticated, this is the hardest or second hardest slide of my entire talk, so I'll try and go slowly. The most sophisticated technique we used came from a branch of computer vision called shade from shading. And I told you we didn't have a model of her face. We don't know exactly how long her nose was, her chin, and so forth. So we used a computer graphics face. It's actually of a man's face. And we adjusted the pose to match the painting as closely as possible. Then if we assume that's her face, the computer can say, for that face, the light has to be coming from this direction to give you the pattern of lightness that we find in the painting as well as possible. But it's not going to be accurate because this face, this 3D model of her face, is not really what her face looked like. So we have an estimate to the light, but it's not going to be accurate. So we temporarily assumed that was the correct light and then fix the face and say, all right, now make her nose shorter, or the computer fix the face to make an even better match with the pattern of lightness that we find in the painting. And we've got a better model of her face. And then we've got a better model of face. We can go back and re-estimate the direction of illumination. So we go back and forth. That's what this cycling does. Find a position of the light, fix the face. Now you have a fixed face, fix the light, go back and forth until it settles down. And that gives us an estimate for the direction of illumination. If that was too fast, ask me questions at the end of the talk. That's one of the second hardest slide of the talk. And it turns out 160 plus or minus 5 degrees. The last technique we used was to build a full 3D computer graphics model of the tableau, which means we can now rotate it around. He's wearing another pearl. Yeah, when I showed this at the Maritz house, the friends of the Maritz house went crazy because they'd never seen the back of their painting. So then I'm going to stop it in the configuration that matches the painting as closely as. Can you turn that light off there? That your cell phone light. Thank you. It washes this out here. So now I'm going to move the light source around the back of the model, and I'm going to stop it in the configuration that matches the actual painting. And then we're going to fly around Vermeer's studio to look at the girl from many different directions. And then I'm going to stop it in the final configuration that matches the actual painting, and then do what's called an alpha blend, basically a blurring from the computer model to the actual painting. And you'll see how well it actually matches. And here we go. There we stop it, and we do this so-called alpha blend to get to the painting, and it matches incredibly closely. And of course, we know where we put the light source, and that gives us an estimate to the direction of illumination. So here are 3 stills from that movie, if you will, with the light too high, too low, and just right. And the answer, the final angle turns out to be 160 plus or minus 5 degrees. Well, here are the results. Here are all those, everything I've shown you, and the final result is about 155 degrees. And that's not very interesting, it's not very important, and nobody really cares. What people really care about, however, is the incredible agreement among all those methods, the very small standard deviation, we say. That, and here's one way to view it. The red line is that 155 degrees. The light's most likely in that direction. And the yellow curve, just cardioid, just tells you the relative probability of finding the light in different directions. And the fact that it's all pointed almost in the same direction means all those methods agree incredibly well. Vermeer was extraordinarily accurate in rendering the effects of light. Okay, why would an art historian be interested in this? Well, as many of you know, this is not a portrait. We don't know who this girl is. It's called a trony, or a mug shot, basically, a character sketch, in this case, to celebrate youth and beauty and so forth. And some art scholars actually posited that there was no girl in Vermeer's studio, that he painted it from his imagination. The fact that these methods all agree so well almost surely shows there was a girl in fact present. Sometimes artists add things later. Imagine all of these directions agreed very well, but the direction from the pearl differed by, 10 degrees. That would suggest that the pearl was added later as an afterthought, possibly by another artist. That's not the case here, but it is the case in other works. And so we can use these techniques of lighting analysis to look for style and look for consistency within a tableau. So you might have a Renaissance portrait with 4 figures, and the lighting's all the same on 3 of them, but different on another, like Brad and Angelina. And that would suggest that one of them was done under different studio conditions, maybe different time of year, and so forth. And so analyzing lighting is something that computing has really helped us with. And just the other day, it's at the Brancacci Chapel, and the lighting is an important one of many important stylistic differences between Masolino and Masaccio. course, art scholars are very interested to know which figures were painted by whom and when and so forth. So these lighting techniques can really help. Now, a big jump to some of my more recent work. Art differs from the kinds of images that computer scientists have been studied in a number of ways, but perhaps the most important is that they convey a meaning. Beyond just the description of the objects in front of you, there's a story, a message, a meaning, or a moral. So if you look at Jan van Steenwijk's Still Life, an allegory of the vanity of human life, or any or many such vanitas paintings, we know that the skull represents mortality, that the watch on the table represents the passage of time and hence death, that the oil lamp with its flame recently extinguished, with the smoke coming out, means you can die at any time. These were called painted sermons. So there's a lot of meaning and message and moral in this. And we're trying to get computers to figure that out. Well, so for instance, the fact the light comes from the upper left to the lower right and is shining right on the skull certainly has religious overtones. Moreover, the fact that this painting is life-size is important to its meaning. If this were a miniature or a mural or something like that, it wouldn't have the sense of being the size in your room and hence sort of real. And the fact that it has a very realistic style also, and not, rainbow, putti and flying angels and so forth, means this is the real world here around you. All of those things go together to convey a meaning, and getting a computer to figure this out is a real challenge. And I and my students have been working on this. The way we've been approaching it is by taking lots of text written by art scholars about vanitas paintings, not this one in particular. We're not this one in particular. We're learning from Old Dutch descriptions of these paintings, translated into English for the computer, what are called knowledge graphs. It's probably hard to read here, but the green are low-level features, things like, a book represents human knowledge, or smoke represents life's brevity, or wilting flower represents life's brevity, and so forth. So the computer has figured this out, learned this from text, not from the images, from text. But now we can put all these together. Actually, I haven't done this, but we could easily do it within a day. Have a system, you pull up this image, click on the skull, and the computer says, that's a skull, and in this painting, it means mortality. Now, you show this to art scholars, and they say, I knew that. And the point is, what we want to do is automate this and get these computer systems to become more and more and more sophisticated, so we can now search for paintings that have a particular meaning or a particular set of objects that are trying to mean something. And also just try to understand human cognition. How do we infer these higher, deeper meanings? And this is what art is posing to artificial intelligence that traditional image analysis is not. Here's another example. You're all familiar with baptism of Christ, and we all know who these actors are, Christ and St. John the Baptist, but how would a computer know? Well, in religious art, we have what are called attributes, like a dove or a bull, or for St. Catherine, a wheel that she's martyred on and so forth. And for St. John the Baptist, we have the crucifixion cross. And each saint or religious actor, many of them have such attributes. So we trained a computer to recognize attributes in Renaissance, mainly Renaissance paintings. And so here the computer does recognize that that's a dove, and that this is a crucifixion cross. And then another computer technique finds the people. There's no question to humans where the people are, but it's hard. You got to get a computer to find out where the humans are. And I have that here, colored in this maroon. And then the computer puts it together and says, for each figure, what's the closest attribute? And then basically looks up and says, oh, so this is Christ. That's Christ, Christ, and that's St. John the Baptist. Again, very basic. All of you know this and so forth, but we're working now to get computers to do this so that we can do it over a large number. And then if we want to work on South Pacific Island art, where all these symbols and so forth are different, we can get the computer to do that as well. Another technique, another problem we're working on is recovering lost artworks. Gustav Klimt painted 4 very large ceiling paintings for the University of Vienna in, I think it was 1907. And during World War II, when the Allied Army, the Brits and the Americans were coming to Vienna, the Germans and Austrians burned all those paintings, lest they fall into American and Brit hands. But before they did so, they took black and white photos. So this is medicine for the School of Medicine at the University of Vienna. And so there was no color involved. They didn't have color photography, or this, at least for this painting. Wouldn't it be nice to know what the original colors were? That painting's gone. We don't even have copies and sketches, unfortunately, of it. But we do have textual descriptions from the time. Oh, her hair is brunette, or whatever it might have been. We also have other paintings by Klimt where we learn his palette and his style and so forth. And then the computer puts all this together, I think it's 27,000 pieces of information to colorize, if you will, that painting. And this is what it looks like. And you show this to Klimt scholars, and they are very impressed and reasonably convinced that this is highly accurate. Well, that technique, what I and my students want to work on is take this one step further and recover paintings that have been lost entirely. And here we go. First of all, I should point out that you can get computers to generate paintings in a particular style, like Rembrandt. This is not a so-called pastiche. This isn't the hat from one painting, the color from another. No, it takes several thousand sort of pieces and learns the compositional style of Rembrandt and can make a painting highly plausible in the style of Rembrandt. So we want to put those kinds of techniques together to recover lost artworks. And to bring that home here to Florence, as you're all familiar with the Bonfire of the Vanities, Savonarola's destruction of many, many paintings, ones that had women's hats, mirrors, wigs, and so forth, of the vanities and so forth. Botticelli lost several paintings there. Wouldn't it be great to take surviving sketches and other information and put it together and see what those paintings look like? Much of the work is collecting data, and I hope to come back to Florence to be able to get some more of the information in order to do this. Now, I wasn't planning on talking this, but there are several people here in Florence who are interested in this particular topic, but it's fairly old, maybe even 20 years old. But how computer techniques helped resolve what was a big debate a quarter century ago, but is no longer. When you stand back and look at the grand sweep of the development of Western painting, you find something very interesting happened around 1430. Before that time, images were rather schematic, like this Giotto fresco portrait, or this Austrian portrait of a king, or this Masolino in the Brancacci Chapel, which I saw again on Monday. But after that time, you get paintings like this. Robert Campin's A Man of 1430. It looks so realistic, almost photographic. This portrait has a personality, an individuality, a psychological depth lacking in these earlier works. This man looks like us. What happened? Well, in order to explain the emergence of this new art, or ars nova, the celebrated contemporary British-American painter David Hockney came up with a bold and very controversial so-called optical tracing theory. He laid his argument out in a book called Secret Knowledge. And in a nutshell, Hockney claimed that artists secretly invented and used optical devices during the execution of their works in order to get this new realism. And he's partly inspired by the fact that he himself uses photographs in many of his paintings, including this Portrait of the Artist. Incredible painting. And here's Hockney demonstrating his technique. Here's Hockney in his studio in Santa Monica, California, my home state. Very important, a lot of sunlight. The figure is outside, there's a window, and the key element in all of this is this right here. It's a concave mirror, like a shaving or makeup mirror. And anyone in physics can tell you this can project an image just as does a lens. And in this case, the image would be on the other side of the wall, upside down, so-called real inverted image that Hockney believes the artist would then trace, then bring it down, and then while looking at the figure, perhaps add paint. Well, here's just one of the paintings Hockney adduces as evidence for his painting, for his theory. Georges de Latour's Christ in the Carpenter's Studio in the Louvre. He claims the source of light seems to be outside the picture, as it must be if you use optics. Joseph and the girl, not a girl, it's Christ, were probably painted separately, each lit by a shielded light source in place of the other figure. So in his book, Secret Knowledge, he shows two, I'll call them half paintings. He says, when de Latour was painting Christ, the light source was in place of St. Joseph. And when he was painting Joseph, the light source was in place of Christ. So you have to look at St. Joseph and say, where's the light source? You're not very good. I'm not very good. Hockney is not very good at finding out where the light source is, but the computer techniques are extremely good. Let me show you. The simplest technique was cast shadow analysis. You take a point on the beam, the cast shadow of the St. Joseph left thumb, draw a straight line between it, and bingo, it goes right to the candle. If you know this painting, the white you see there is smoke. The flame is behind Christ's fingers. If you do the whole set of such cast shadows, you find that they generally agree, or that most agree right at the candle. There's only one that is a little bit off. It has a small sort of lever arm. And you see these contours. These are contours of equal a posteriori probability density. Don't worry about the math. All it says is that it's given this evidence, it's most likely the light is here, less likely here, less likely here, less likely here, like a high pressure region on a weather map. And this is the mathematics, forget about it. And then we also use, there's more lighting information. We could use the occluding contour algorithm. So you take occluding contours. And first, let me show you, we've done a lot of work on Caravaggio. Shows where the light source is in Caravaggio, in the Supper of Emmaus. This other Georges de Latour, Smoking Flame at LACMA. And they all agree very closely with the position of the candle. But here it is for the de Latour. So we, the experimenters, mark the contours, but the computer measures the lightness along that and then computes what's the direction to the illumination. And look how well they meet at the candle. This is really extraordinary. Look at the light on Christ's skin. The computer doesn't know about 3 dimensions or Mannerist art or anything like that, but it can measure the lightness, and it says, you know, with all that, the light source is in this direction. You can't do it, I can't do it, and Hockney can't do it. but it all points right to the candle, not in place of the other figure, and certainly not outside the frame of the painting. Hockney is simply wrong. Here is the same kind of equal a posteriori, where the evidence says it is. Most likely here, less likely here, less likely here, less likely here, and so forth. One of the benefits of this mathematical technique is that we can now put together evidence from different methods. So here's the cast shadow evidence. Here's the occluding contour evidence. Turns out he doesn't multiply those probability posteriors, they're called. And putting it all together, it says, the light source should be right here, less likely here, and certainly not outside the frame of the picture, as it must be if you use optics, as Hockney says. But there's more lighting information we haven't yet used. There's a pattern of light over the floor in the studio. The light is bright in the middle and dark at the side. So where would a light source be? Would it be out here? No. Would it be over here? No. Somewhere in the middle. Where exactly? Well, I won't go through the math here. There's a lot of math. It looks complicated, and this is a little bit complicated. Yeah, there you go. The bottom line is going through all of that says this is where the light source would be to give you the pattern of light that you find on the floor. Now, it's not exactly at the candle. This is a painting after all, but it's certainly not in place of, say, of the figures, and certainly not outside the frame of the painting as Hockney demands. But there's still more lighting information we haven't used, the pattern of light over Christ's chest and all throughout. So just like with the girl of the pearl earring, we built a 3D computer graphics model, and we're going to put the light source in place of St. Joseph and render Christ. And then we're going to put it in place of the candle and render Christ, and see which one matches the painting best. Problem is we don't know the depth into the tableau, how far in it should go. So we tried 19 positions for St. Joseph, 19 for the candle, chose the best, and then compared. So here's a computer graphics model, big art history, St. Joseph the carpenter, worldly knowledge, Christ is the light of the world, he holds a candle. And so here, I hope you can see the shadow changing as we move the light in the computer model. And then we're going to move around to the back of the painting, all the way around to the girl with the pearl earring, and then stop it in the configuration that matches the actual painting to an alpha blend. And then here is the best image we could get with the light in place of St. Joseph, the one that matches the painting best. Here's the one with the light in place of the candle. And you have to say, which one of these matches the actual painting best? There's no question, none whatsoever, that the light in place of the candle matches that in the painting best. Look at the pattern of light over Christ's chest. The direction of the cast shadow of the shin, not exactly the same, but much, much better than here. And throughout, no question, the light was at the position of the candle, and Hockney is wrong. And the last painting I have time to talk about this evening is Van Eyck's portrait of Arnold Feeney and his wife, an incredible masterpiece at the National Gallery in London. I'm sure you've all seen it. This is a painting that Hockney believes was done using optics. We will question that. Hockney and his colleague Charles Falco said, Van Eyck placed a convex mirror at the very center of this Arnold Feeney masterpiece. The very mirror which turned around, he may well have used to construct the image, to make it into a concave projection mirror. You've all seen this. It's an extraordinary masterpiece, mini masterpiece, only a few centimeters across. You see the back of Arnold Feeney, you see the back of his wife, you see the two witnesses to the wedding coming through the doorway, but it's clearly a convex mirror because we can see all the distortion in the window here, like this. Well, if that mirror was used, then the focal length of that mirror, basically, if you take parallel light and bring it to a focus, that distance should be the same for the projection mirror and the evidence in the painting. First, let me go back and remind you, if you know photography, here's a picture of me, the beginning assistant many years ago, beginning assistant professor at Swarthmore College, taken with a short focal length camera lens, 24 millimeters, a wide angle. Notice the size of me and the size of the pillars on Parish Hall, back there. Then the photographer put on a normal lens, 50 millimeters, which magnifies everything by a factor of 2 compared to this. But he moved back from me twice as far to ensure that I'm the same size in the two paintings, the photos. But look at the pillars. The pillars appear much larger. Then he put on a telephoto lens and moved back from me 4 times as much. And I'm still the same size, but the pillars appear larger still. They're all in perfect perspective. They're photographs, after all. It's just what the center of projection is, where the artist's eye, where the camera center of projection is. If you have an image like this, like a photograph or a traced image, and you know the sizes of the objects, you can work backwards and infer what focal length was used. I assure you, it's not hard. I teach my undergraduate art history majors how to do it at Stanford. Everyone in this audience really, really can be taught how to do it. I won't do it now, but I assure you, you can do it. Anyway, so here's just to remind you the effect of the so-called center of projection on this computer graphics model of Vermeer's music lesson. If you put it close to the Alberti's window, you get this image. You move further back, you get this. You move further back, you get this. Then you move further back, you get this. It's so-called orthographic perspective when you're infinitely far away. Well, now we want to use this basic idea to infer the focal length of the any projection system that would have been used on the Arnolfini portrait. Well, we have to know or make assumptions about three-dimensional objects in the tableau. So we made a computer graphics model. There's the mathematics. And here is from the side, a ray tracing diagram. So to scale, this is the size of the painting on oak panel. And you say, where would I put a lens or a concave mirror? It doesn't make a difference, turns out. You put it here to get the size of the image of the chandelier to correspond to that of the real chandelier. It's not real, it's computer graphics, but you get the idea. For the size of Arnolfini and the image of Arnolfini and so forth. And once you have this set up, what's called the object distance, from the objects to the lens, and the image distance from the image to the lens, and it's high school optics, you can calculate the focal length, turns out to be 61 plus or minus 8 centimeters. Well, now we have to estimate the focal length of the concave mirror that Hockney and Falco believe was used for projection. I won't go through the mathematics, but here is the side view of such a convex mirror. And if light comes from outside, it reflects and obeys the law of reflection. And that will distort the image because of the curvature. And that's the mathematics, but it just says if these are the positions in the mirror, this is where they are in a distant tableau. They're distorted. Everything gets distorted. And here's one way to look at it. So here is the Arnolfini reflection, and we can mathematically adjust that curvature, the bulginess, until the distortion is undone. And this is the image we get. This is an absolutely astounding image. This is the view you would get if you were to walk into Arnolfini's room, stand at that mirror, turn around and look back into the tableau, revealed nearly 500 years after this painting was made. But you notice how rectilinear it is now. We have got the right curvature for that curvy mirror, and that lets us find its focal length. So here is the focal length for the painting, and here's the mirror at the back. And if Hockney and Falco are right, these focal lengths should be pretty close. When you do the math, 18 plus or minus 4 centimeters, much, much, much too short, could not have been used. Here from my Scientific American article 20 years ago is a way to reveal the curvature of the mirror on the back and the curvature that would be necessary for the tableau. Much, the orange sphere, basically, much too different for it to work. Okay, well, maybe that mirror didn't work. Might another mirror have been used on the Arnolfini? And the answer is no. Why? Because perspective is inconsistent. This is not a criticism of the painting. This is before the rules of geometric perspective, which were discovered just across the river, were brought up to Bruges and the Netherlands. These straight lines should meet at a vanishing point. They don't. These two lines from the floor meet up here, but this one never meets it at all, and so forth. So it's very cockeyed. And for the experts who want to say, oh, well, maybe he used the projection here and then moved a different projection here and moved around. How do you get the nice straight lines over some very, very long distances and so forth? Completely inconsistent. But what about that chandelier? David Hockney got on CBS 60 Minutes. I don't know how many of you are Americans, but CBS 60 Minutes is a very popular TV show. And he told 8 million people, quote, that chandelier is in perfect perspective. And he says, well, that shows that it must have been done under some sort of projection. Couldn't have done it by eye and get it in perfect perspective, or it would have been really, really hard. I thought I'd check. Here's an overhead view or plan of the 6-arm chandelier. Consider 2 points on 2 neighboring arms. Those, like the decorative crockets, those define a line in Arnolfini's room. Think of my 2 physical bodily arms. This elbow and this elbow define a line in this room. That line is parallel to the floor because these are at the same elevation. That line is also perpendicular to the vertical plane bisecting these 2 arms, okay? Think of 2 other points, like my 2 thumbs. They're at the same elevation. They define a line that's parallel to the floor and also perpendicular to the vertical plane. So those 2 lines are parallel in Arnolfini's room, okay? And likewise for these. All of them are parallel. Okay, so the green lines are what I just showed you. You think about symmetry. Lines defined by these 2 arms on the chandelier are also parallel. And if you really think about it, lines defined by these 2 arms of the chandelier are also parallel. They're all parallel in Arnolfini's room. Here is a symmetric computer graphics model of the chandelier. And if it's in perfect perspective, it is, it's computer graphics. Then the projections of those sight lines should meet at a vanishing point. And when you do it, sure, they all meet at a nice vanishing point, just like this. Here's the Arnolfini chandelier. If Hockney is right, then if we do the same construction on the painting as we did in the computer graphics model, we should get a nice vanishing point down below. When you do it, here's what you get. A mess, complete mess. It's not even close to being in proper perspective, not even close. Most people, even famous painters, are not very good at telling whether something's in proper perspective. Absolutely, positively not at all. And so here's one way to look at it. Or here's just these lines here, straight, these like this, these like this, and they're 15 such things. No vanishing point below and not even defined above, which would have been stupid, you know, insane and so forth. After I published this, they said, well, gosh, maybe the arm is not symmetric, that they soldered on these crockets haphazardly. It was drunk. Well, that alone invalidates the argument, because how would you have known exactly what they are? But it turns out they were, the question is, how far off would they have to be consistent? and I will go through it. It's a whopping 10 centimeters. The chandelier would have to be that goofy to be consistent with the painting. That's how bad the perspective is. Not a bad painting. Moreover, if you go to collections on Denandri, the decorative metalwork of the Renaissance, you find that no, at this time they were never soldered, never. Instead, these arms were made from the same mold, and you get 6 identical arms, and you array them around the central post. And Prayer, I've gone to museums with tape measures and measured these things. They're symmetric to 1 millimeter, not goofy by 10 centimeters. Talking simply wrong. And then my colleague, Antonio Cremonese, who won the ACM, Association for Computing Machinery, best PhD dissertation, part of his dissertation was on how to take, he did it on a different problem, but we applied it to this chandelier. How do you take something at one plane and map it onto another plane? It's called a homography. And if you have exact same shapes, like my arms are perfect shape, then it's really easy. You just say, all right, get the thumb to the thumb, the elbow to the elbow. But what if they have different shapes? I can always find one that gets the thumbs to overlap, then the elbows don't. Or I could get another one to get the elbows to overlap, then the thumbs don't. What's the best overall? And that's the principled way to find the matching of one arm to another. And so we applied his award-winning technique to the Arnolfini chandelier, and this is the best mapping best match you can get. And again, you get this whopping 10 centimeters off, much too large to be consistent with Hockney's claim. And the last painting, the last slide I'll be able to, or second to last slide. Part of Hockney's claim was that it was so difficult to do this by eye. Well, is it really that difficult? As part of our research, Nicholas Williams, a very talented British painter in the south of England, painted 2 paintings, 2 chandeliers entirely by eye. No projections, no optics, no nothing. And we compared the symmetry, the accuracy, if you will, in his 2 paintings. And I'll show you on the next slide, they are superb, better, much better than Van Eyck, except on this lovely chandelier 2, which is hanging over my bedroom in California. The computer found that 5 of the 6 arms are really incredibly accurate, but 1 isn't. And I didn't see it. It certainly looks good to me, but the computer found it. And so I emailed him, said, what's going on? He said, oh yeah, I accidentally dropped that chandelier and it broke off. One of the arms broke off just a little bit and was bent out. 1.5 centimeters, 1.3, close enough. So here is one of those arms from his hand-drawn, hand-painted chandelier. Here's another. And you can't tell whether they have the same, say, intrinsic shape. But the computer takes arm 1, wraps it over arm 2, and that's what we have over there, here, and then you overlap them, and they overlap superbly. Don't worry about the pan, the bobèche, that's sticking out of the plane. This is from one plane to another plane, not the things that stick out. So you don't even need to use some sort of optics to get these kinds of accuracies. Oh, by the way, these mirrors would have given terrible images. The proper mirror should be a parabola, but this would be a section of a sphere. So instead of getting a good image like this, you would get something that looks like this. That's what you're going to trace around and get your fine detail on? Maybe not. In fact, for a hand-blown sphere with just slight variations, the blur spot, the focus is worse still, and you get something that looks like this. Couldn't have been used. Something like that, yes. Oh, moreover, these mirrors were coated on the back with tar to keep the metal from tarnishing. They wouldn't have been reflective at all. There are a dozen reasons why that couldn't have worked. Oh, I don't have time for that last painting. And so let me jump down over a whole host of really cool things. And just jump to my second last slide. So these are world-class scientists, historians of optics and art, and curators and artists, all of whom have published peer-reviewed articles debunking Hackney. So as far as I'm concerned, that theory is absolutely positively dead. And with that, I will thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure we've ever had as much mathematics in the library before. And
counteracts the dogs.
I think we're going to have to invite David back for a series where he teaches us how to read the mathematical models as well, but maybe in another lifetime. But David, thank you very much for a fascinating talk. And we will now, as is our practice, invite the, open it up for, oh yeah, whoops. Yeah, there's the Zoomers are there. Open it up for the questions and answers. And the rules are the same as always. If you're in the room and want to make a comment or ask a question, put your hand up and I'll bring you the microphone. That way the Zoomers can hear us. And if you're on the Zoom, you're invited to put your thoughts and questions onto the chat, which I will now look at.
And my one request is, there are a lot of cool things to talk about. Please, at least at the beginning, restrict to the material I've talked about. Don't say, oh yeah, what about this other painting? Have you ever worked? I probably have, but let's stick to this.
Yeah. Okay, and otherwise, Zoomers, if you want to, you can unmute and we can hear you in the room. You here with us. So, who would like to get started? Do we have a thought or a question? Here we are, Tom in the front row.
Thank you. So Hackney was wrong, but the tools that he described did exist and were used sometimes, but they weren't practical on a regular basis. Is that true?
The real question, we know some artists definitely did use these things. The real question is how early. Hackney was claiming as early as 1420, 1430, a quarter millennium, not a quarter century, a quarter millennium earlier than we have secure evidence. So one artist, Canaletto, and Canaletto certainly had a camera obscura, basically a simple lens to project an image of, for his Verdute paintings, the view paintings of Venice and later London, that he would then trace and then use what's called gridding, put a grid over this, the drawing, and then a large grid over his canvas, and then transfer point by point. So we have secure evidence some artists did this. But at that time, at the time of Van Eyck, that concave mirror projector would have been the most complicated optical system on the planet. If there's anyone online or anyone who disagrees with that, tell me a more complicated optical system in 1420, and I will stand corrected. But no one, historians of optics, do that. So it's like, you know, having Cecily Brown invent the Hubble telescope. Yeah, it's an incredible scientific feat to be able to have it back then. But much later, it was certainly available at the time of Vermeer, and Vermeer is a very interesting case, whether he did use optics or not. I can talk about that too.
Anybody else want to come in with something? Here we are.
Yep.
Thank you for it has been extraordinary. I have a question that is a general question regarding what is, in your experience, starting many years ago, doing this kind of studies with computers and many technologies, what is the level of acceptance of this kind of approach from the art world, so from the non-technical?
Excellent question. You know, part of my life's goal is to get this to be fully accepted by art scholars, and that every student who gets a PhD in art history will take one course on something like this. I find if you're over 55, you are very skeptical. If you're under 30, you think this is absolutely obvious. And of course you do this, and they're not scared at all. So it's a matter of time, I think. but also we're learning from them. Many, or a number of art scholars, have heard that, oh, Stork's using computers and this is absurd. And then they hear my talk, and then over wine, we'll sit over wine, especially if you're skeptical, please, this is the best opportunity. They get convinced, partly because they think the computer is going to take away their, supplant their art knowledge. It will not. And they think that properly that they have decades and decades of subtle knowledge that has to be incorporated when reading any difficult painting. And that's absolutely true. I would come back and say, computers are learning more and more and are improving faster. That if you take your best connoisseurs up here, the computers are like this, and the connoisseurs are getting a little bit better, a little bit better. Computers are going like this. And it's a matter of time that when we get really all art knowledge into these systems, all images, all X-rays, all infrared reflectograms, all textual descriptions in every language, when we have that kind of information available. If you think of ChatGPT times a million just on art, it's going to get better and better. And we need art scholars to improve it. Oh, there's an error here. This is a mistake. You didn't understand this. Great. Help us train these systems. That's my view.
You got somebody in the back.
Just want to get everybody sick tonight. But I'm just curious, following up on that question, in terms of like authentication, especially of paintings, do you see that there's are there examples where scholarship has contradicted these methods? Do you have any?
I just showed you. I just showed you
or
on
or
authentication.
or historical techniques and like written documentation have contradicted the scientific these techniques that you've shown us.
Yeah.
And what do you see as the role of the art historian given this technology?
Excellent question, and this is sort of a follow-up to the question in the front. Which some say, is this going to put me out of a job? And what I say is, if you don't use these, you're going to be out of a job. That there'll be another art scholar who uses it, and if you don't, but authentication is a profound and difficult and very interesting problem. By the way, my big book, 784 pages, was originally going to have 11 chapters. The 11th chapter was to be on authentication. It was a very vexed and difficult problem, and it's just getting larger and larger and larger and larger. And I said, so I'm 200 pages into a book on authentication in the era of art. And I have written papers, and a growing number of people are using computer methods for authentication based on image. They're very naive that you don't authenticate just from a digital image, but you also need provenance and material studies and condition and all these things. But putting all this information together is something computers are very good at. And the analogy I like to bring is medical image diagnosis. For years, doctors did the diagnosis, but now we have computers that can take the blood pressure, the temperature, all these things, to put it together, and your genetic history, and your race, and your size, and all this stuff, and are more accurate at diagnosing cancers and simple things like that. And I think the same thing is going to happen with art, that we'll need to train these systems, give them lots and lots of data, improve them. They will make mistakes, but I think they will get better and better as time goes on. And to give a hint where my next book is going, the biggest shock to the art world I think it's going to have is that at the end of the day, I think the proper language and reasoning should be in the language of probability. That my first chapter is going to give lots of examples. Oh, this painting with no, it's not Vermeer. Yes, it's Vermeer. No, yes, it's Vermeer. No, it's not Vermeer. Or look at Bernard Berenson, one of the greatest connoisseurs. He's around here, right? He was wrong 20% of the time, and he's one of the best. So I think we have great opportunity to use these computer techniques, not just images with X-rays, and all the supporting information for making a probabilistic estimate of authorship. And I could talk for a long time. I'll just say one or two more sentences. Some my colleagues and friends in the commercial artwork say, no one wants to buy a Monet that has an 80% chance of being a Monet. Right? I just bought this painting. There's an 80% chance. No, no one wants that. They love certainty. And I come back and I say, imagine these techniques really work. It will take a long time, but it really work. And I could say there's a 10% chance this is by Rembrandt. And you can buy it for $5,000. And you can buy 10 of them for $5,000 each. Would you do it? I would. I most certainly would. I think it will change the way we view art as an investment and purchasing. And fundamentally, it's more truthful. Anyway, I could talk for a long time on that.
We're going to go to one here. There's a couple on the chat, and then one there, and then that's probably going to be it because we're getting run over. So,
thank you very much for that really fascinating talk. I had just questioned about your work and whether you feel the benefits of this, moving away from art history and what you've been talking about, allow us to experience art in a slightly different way, allow us to walk inside the painting, like to walk into a place with a level of authenticity that you couldn't do before. I think that could be a direction that the world will move towards. So you can understand architecture, you can understand social history in a way that takes your work to a different level.
I agree. That's not quite what I do. That's often called digital humanities. Oh, let's have the Parthenon and walk through the Parthenon. And that's great. And mine is really analysis. It's more like what an art scholar does rather than a museum for the experience. So I do think, here's a project. I know this doesn't sound like it, Florence, but you all know Jackson Pollock. One of my students has been using an algorithm I invented called the depict algorithm. You all know Jackson Pollock's drip paintings. Well, he drips one color, then he'll drip another color, then he'll drip another color, and we see the final painting. Wouldn't it be nice to watch the painting develop? See what it first looked like, then the second, and so forth. Well, we have a computer technique that basically digitally removes the top layer of paint, the last drips, in paints, fills them in, does it again, does it again. I can show you pictures if you want to take time after that during the wine. And so wouldn't it be great to be able to see how these paintings develop? Another closely related aspect is learning the pentimenti, the underdrawings, and so forth, how you use that information plus the final version to interpret what the artist was doing. That I think is an incredibly interesting problem to work on. So that's how it will, my work will change how we look at art.
There's a couple on the chat here from Jennifer Skeeping. As computers gather comprehensive knowledge on art, how do you think that AI might affect the art?
Many people ask about, DALL-E and generate, using computers to generate art. I'm fundamentally not interested in that. I'm not a studio artist. I'm an art scholar, art historian, art analyst. I'm interested in oil on canvas and understanding that rather than new techniques of typing a prompt and getting an artwork produced.
AI generating new Leonardos to another day. And then from Edward Cheney, I think you agree that Vermeer used lenses, but I'm not sure the extent to which you do. Perhaps you could summarize. Is that going to go on a lot? Is that long answer?
No, I'll make it. I was honored to be invited to the extraordinary, the greatest art exhibition I ever saw in my life, the Vermeer Symposium, Vermeer exhibition at the Rijksmuseum, 2 years ago. And I was invited to lecture in the two-day symposium on my computer analysis of Vermeer's works, and I just a couple of weeks ago submitted my chapter to the book that's coming out. The title is "Did Vermeer Use Optics?" And here it is in a nutshell. Email me, and I can send you a PDF of that chapter. Here's my précis. He certainly saw images in a camera obscura. We know he didn't own a camera obscura. He didn't have lenses in his estate, but next door at a religious organization, they did have one. That's how he would have seen the blur spots, the out of focus points. But it's almost certain he did not directly use it. He did not trace during the execution. Talk to me over wine. I'm happy to.
Edward,
So he saw and was influenced, but didn't directly.
Edward, if you want to follow up, just drop me an email and I'll connect you to David. Okay. Okay. The very last question over here.
Thank you so much for your masterclass. It's amazing. I'm very interested to understand why in the Renaissance there was kind of an interest about light. This maybe your research can shed some
I think
light.
there are probably people in this room who are better equipped to talk about the cultural history. I'm happy to talk about the mathematics of perspective as much as you want.
And the physics of light.
Why here? Why then? I mean, you're having a whole symposium on that. Talk to somebody else. I mean, I can. Yeah, there are better people than me than that.
All right. Okay. Everyone has a limit, even the polymaths. All right. So look, I think it just remains for me to thank Donna again for being our sponsor. Okay.
Thank you.
And thank David very much. And we'll see you all again next week for the Italy and the American Imagination. That's right. And now it's wine time. Many thanks to our sponsors, Poggio Torselli, for the wine this season.
Okay, great.